perspective of someone who has lived the legalization of marijuana in the first state to do it, Colorado, firsthand. I'm a dad. I've got 2 little girls, 6 and 2. Wonderful, lovely wife that I'm married to as well. We see this firsthand. I've seen us go from a state with no marijuana to medical marijuana to recreational marijuana and learn a lot of those lessons. And so I'm going to be speaking from that firsthand experience. And today I've got a lot of great new data that we've gotten from states, as well as the federal government, as well as national research, international research, just the latest information we're learning from the impact of the legalization of marijuana. And so without further ado, I will get into it here. And so just, before I get into the subject at hand, I want to talk a little bit about my organization. So Lisa mentioned, and Lisa, thank you for your years of great service to the state and all the things that you've done. Lisa mentioned we're nonpartisan. So we were co-founded by former congressman from Rhode Island, Patrick Kennedy, as well as folks on the conservative side of the aisle. We have people left, right, in the center that got our work. We have an award-winning science advisory board of people from Harvard, Princeton. They're doing the research on marijuana even as we speak. They guide our work. They've reviewed the congressman's presentation and made sure our sources were right. So we really cut our teeth on cutting-edge science when it comes to this discussion. Public health to us is number one. So you're not going to hear a lot from me today on all the millions to be made off of selling marijuana and industry profit and all of that. We're not interested in that. We are interested in public health and protecting families and kids. And so that's where we really think this conversation needs to start. We have 2 organizations, SAM Action. SAM is our nonprofit. SAM Action helps us with our lobbying work and policy work more specifically. But what we're really proud of is the work we do with organizations like the American Medical Association, the Academy of Pediatrics. These are national medical associations who share our concerns about the potential for harm when it comes to commercializing marijuana. They share our concerns about high-potency marijuana, which we're going to talk about. So we work with basically every medical society and association, as well as a lot of folks like you here in the room. Prevention organizations, law enforcement. I want to thank our members of law enforcement for being here, for the service that you do. And folks all across the various entities that you see here, business groups as well. And so, before I get into what I want to talk about, I do want to give a little bit of a policy update from the federal perspective. President Biden last year signed the first piece of marijuana-related legislation to pass Congress in 40 years. It was a bill that we co-authored and supported. It expanded the research on marijuana today, which we think, as an organization, more research is better. We want scientists to get their hands on this. We want to understand what is going on with the substance and what potential medical benefits there may be as well. And that is through the scientific process. So what this does is, this bill is called the Marijuana Research Act. Makes it easier for researchers to get their hands on marijuana to study it. It helps them to be able to, it encourages the FDA to have more marijuana-based medications that they are reviewing, so that if there is medical potential, we can get that legal and in prescription form. Which, by the way, that's a totally separate process than what we have in states where they're politically legalizing what's called medical marijuana. That is a non-scientific process, which I'm happy to get into if you all want to. But this is really pushing the FDA to continue to do research on the medical side. At the national level, just a little highlight, over the last year, 4 states have rejected the legalization of recreational marijuana at the ballot. Arkansas, Hawaii, North Dakota, South Dakota, and then Oklahoma just in March. Every single one of their 77 counties rejected the legalization of recreational marijuana. So that's just the latest on the ballot measures going on nationally. Also, I think we're all starting to hear a lot more about Delta-8 THC. Basically what's happened is, in 2018, Congress legalized hemp for manufacturing purposes. And what they didn't realize was that bad actors could extract and derive copycat forms of marijuana, like Delta-8 THC, THC-0, from hemp, and sell that. And what we're seeing is it's being sold in gas stations all across the country in ways that you can see here, sour tangy, gummies, etc. Ways that are very appealing to youth. This is a brand new kind of substance. It acts just like marijuana. It's mind-altering, addictive, etc. But we have no idea what the long-term health harms are of this, because it's literally just been derived chemically in labs in the last couple of years. So we're working with states like Arkansas, West Virginia. We just implemented bans on this substance, on any mind-altering derivative of hemp, because this is a raging crisis across our country. We're seeing this end up in schools, and kids are getting their hands on it as well. So That's a little bit of the update. I want to get into the latest stuff going on in the marijuana space from state to state and nationally. What we're seeing is, with the legalization of marijuana has come a dramatic change in what marijuana looks like today. Two big changes from pre-legalization to post-legalization. First is, what we're seeing with this slide, the increase in the potency of marijuana. Average potency of marijuana just a couple of decades ago was 2 to 3% THC. That's the ingredient that gets you high. Now we're talking about products that are upwards of 90, even 99% potency. The average has more than 5 times the average of what it was just 2 decades ago in terms of potency. But we're seeing stuff even up to 99% potency now. It is a totally different drug than it was in the Woodstock days, than it was even just a few years ago. And so we have to treat it like a different substance. So, you hear a lot of the old myths and refrains about marijuana is harmless, it's not addictive, but that is kind of long gone now with what we're looking at with commercial grade THC. So what have we seen? Well, more Americans really than ever are using marijuana now as of 2021. It's doubled since 2003. Over 50 million Americans have used marijuana within the last year. Okay, so there's a lot more interest. Why is that? Well, the second big change we've seen with marijuana that I was talking about is the commercialization of the drug. It is now a mega industry, even though it's still federally illegal, and it's still illegal in most American states. How has that commercialization happened? Well, the industry is allowed to promote, sell, push their products, invent new ways to use it, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But they're also now invested in by big tobacco, big alcohol, and big pharma. And a lot of people say, well, Luke, you're the one that's funded by big tobacco, alcohol, pharma, because you don't want to have marijuana out there. I wish that was the case. I'd be loaded, I'd have tons of money. But no, that's on the other side. And so what we've seen is tobacco sees this as their new business. So Altria is the new name for Philip Morris and Marlboro. They have put more than $2 billion into the marijuana industry. Constellation Brands is the largest alcohol conglomerate in this country. They put $4 billion into the marijuana industry. So these are mega addiction for profit players. They literally 10% of alcohol users make up 75% of the alcohol industry's profits. Okay, so literally a very small portion of this country that are very heavily using alcohol make up the majority of the alcohol profits for that industry. Okay. And so what we're seeing with marijuana is the exact same thing, where a very small number of users are making up most of the sales from marijuana. Just about 17% in Colorado, my state, 17% of the people using marijuana make up 80% of the consumption. Okay, so heavy use is driving this. So it's the same playbook we saw from tobacco, from alcohol, and now we're starting to begin to see that with marijuana as well. So the reason why we're seeing more people interested, big commercial influence, mass marketing campaigns, we're all hearing the messages about how marijuana is harmless, it's great, it's good for you. That's what's driving this movement right now. And so that message is trickling down, whether we like it or not. Policy decisions have adverse consequences that we have to confront. It's trickling down to our youth as well. We know from the last years, from our federal survey data, 34% of high schoolers tried marijuana last year, 20% of high school seniors, 20% of sophomores used it last year, 8% of 8th graders used it last year. So our youth are becoming more interested as they see more advertising, more promotion, more discussion of this in the policy circles, more state-level legalization. I hear people tell me that we were promised in Colorado, legalize and regulate it. Kids don't have IDs, so there's no way they can purchase marijuana in the pot shops. And I said, that's working out great for alcohol and tobacco, isn't it? It just really bothers me when I think about going to a public high school and how those legal drugs flowed like water through my high school, and then I'm being told, well, no, the answer to stop youth use is to legalize and regulate marijuana. That'll do it. We have to have our eyes wide open. When you legalize, you increase the prevalence, the promotion, then that trickles down to our youth, and so we have to think about that impact. But beyond our youth, really the most concerning demographic is the young adult category, so ages 19 to 30. Ages 19 to 30 is really driving the increase in use across the country. So you look at these numbers, the leftmost bar is past year use, middle is past month, right side is daily use. You see the increases, 11%, young adults 19 to 30, 11% using every single day. your brain is developing up until the age of 25, some say even 28. So this is a very big cause for concern. This is also our next, what will be in the workforce, the folks that will be in the workforce, the majority. So these are things we need to think about. I mentioned 2 big changes. I really should have said 3 big changes since we legalized marijuana in different states in this country. The third big change is that with the increase in potency, with the commercialization, the third big change we're seeing is the increase in addiction to marijuana. So let me just be completely clear with you. The myth that marijuana is not addictive is not scientific and it's not based in any kind of reality. So when we see the industry narrative out there that it's not addictive, do not believe it. The science is absolutely clear. There's an ICD-10 code for cannabis use disorder. You will be diagnosed with it if you have marijuana addiction. This exists. And we're seeing, as you can see in the data here, huge increase in addiction to marijuana in 12 to 17-year-olds across the country. 145% increase over the last literally 3 years, okay, from 2018 to 2021. So big increases. Those other bars you see, by the way, are alcohol and opioids. And we're seeing addiction rise much faster to marijuana among our youth than alcohol and opioids right now. And it can only be attributed to irresponsible messaging around there and the increased prevalence of this substance. And speaking of irresponsible messaging, look at the perception of harm for youth right now. So 1991, most youth, 78% of them thought regular use of marijuana was harmful. 21% now. 21% of you think it's harmful now. Occasional use, only 12% think that it's harmful now. So our youth are getting the message loud and clear. This is just medicinal, it's a plant, and that's really getting out there. So I mentioned the addiction potential. Now, so 2 decades ago, if you used marijuana, the old kind of low potency marijuana, 1 in 10 people would develop a cannabis use disorder and addiction. Now, today, with the high potency marijuana, now we're looking at 1 in 3 people, 30%, will, if they've used marijuana last year, they will develop a marijuana addiction. It's just the science. This is from our National Institutes of Health. It's literally on their page, they talk about this study. This is what we're looking at for the addictive potential of today's drug. Totally different. What do I mean by different? I talk about high potency marijuana. The fastest growing way for youth to use marijuana today is dabbing. Show of hands, who knows what dabbing is? Okay, so we got more hands in the room, that's good, but still under half of you. Laura Stack, my neighbor here in Colorado where I'm from, she didn't know what dabbing was. Her son, Johnny Stack, 16 years old, he knew what dabbing was. 2 years ago, almost to the day, he jumped off of a parking garage after dabbing marijuana. And so now she knows what dabbing is, and she's educating parents across the country. What dabbing is it is the new way to use high-potency marijuana. What essentially you do is you vaporize a tiny little dab of THC, usually about 99% potent, so extremely high potency. You vaporize it, they have a dab rig, they inhale that vapor, it goes right to their head, they get very high very fast. See people blacking and browning out from this stuff. Okay, so it is a huge growing way to use it. Didn't exist before legalization. This is an innovation only a very technologically advanced, capitalist, free market industry could invent. And it's not just dabbing, it's vaping. We didn't have vapes 10 years ago. We have vaping oils for THC. We have all kinds of new ways, shatters, waxes, all kinds of new ways to use marijuana, which, by the way, are not being grown naturally in farms by millennials who are just trying to be hip and cool. We're talking about chemical labs now that are genetically modifying this plant to make it this potent. It was never this potent in a state of nature. The marijuana plant, 1 to 3% potency, 1 to 3% THC in that plant. Now they're literally growing plants that are up to 40% THC in the plant. Not natural, folks. That is genetically modified. Then they're extracting THC in labs to make it more potent than even that, up to the 99%. So we're not talking about something that's organic. We're not talking about something that's just about farming. We're talking about something that has now been altered immensely. And if you'll just excuse me, one other thing I'll say about just a historical lesson here. Same thing is at play with tobacco. Millions of people, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, were not dying from smoking tobacco. They were not getting cancer from smoking tobacco. So what changed about 120 years ago? The invention of the cigarette, The global supply chain model and big tobacco, massive corporations taking tobacco, splicing it with nicotine, splicing it with ammonia and other additives, inventing the cigarette, making it more addictive so that more people use it, and now we have millions of people dying from cancer from that. So it's not that, oh wow, the marijuana plant is just the most horrible plant in the world. It's what happens when you commercialize a mind-altering and addictive potential substance. We saw that with tobacco, now we're seeing it with marijuana, and it should really concern you that tobacco sees so many similarities in this business opportunity that there are multiple billions of dollars into the industry. Okay, so we should be very clear about what's behind this and what's driving it. So I talked about the addiction. We're seeing a 25% increase in cannabis use disorder among 12 to 17-year-olds in every single state that has legalized recreational marijuana. Every single one. 25% increase in their youth marijuana addiction. So that message has been heard. And we're seeing increases in the strain on our health system, particularly with ER visits. How many of you know what cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is? Got one hand, couple hands. Okay. We gotta be watching out for that, because in states with legal marijuana, that's one of the leading diagnosis codes that's leading these ER visits. What it is uncontrollable vomiting that stems from regular or heavy marijuana use. Some doctors call it scromiting. They're screaming and vomiting at the same time. People are dying from that now. They're vomiting so much they can't be controlled, they can't breathe. It's causing all kinds of problems, and it's from heavy marijuana use. This is something most people didn't even have a clue about 10 years ago. But now, with the increase in use, the increase in heavy use particularly, that is one of the consequences that we're seeing. Also, we're seeing these visits stem from psychiatric-related admissions as well, which I'll get into in just a little bit. The strain on the healthcare system is important to note, because there's a lot of research now that's going into looking at, okay, how does marijuana use affect your broader holistic health? This study looked at marijuana users and controlled for 60 different confounding variables, like did they use other illicit drugs, did they have pre-existing health conditions, etc. And when controlling for all of those variables, they found that marijuana users are 25% more likely to need hospital or emergency services. Okay, and so, it makes sense. If you're a tobacco user, you're going to need more emergency services, more healthcare services. If you're, somebody who has comorbidities, you're going to need more services. This is not just a vitamin herb that you take. It's something that causes long-lasting health harms. We have to be open-eyed to that situation. We're also seeing a national increase in poisonings for kids under the age of 6. Huge national increase, 1,000+% increase. You see the numbers, it sounds horrible. Let's put this into perspective, folks. The industry is allowed to put out THC-laced gummy bears, edibles, candies that are very appealing to kids. And you can stop me and say, look, no, that's illegal. It's illegal in every state to target kids. Yes, it is, but they're doing it anyway. They're doing it anyway. There's so many products that are out there, and states do not have they do not even begin to have enough resources to enforce the law against every single thing that happens. I have a picture on my phone that I wish I could throw on this presentation. Walked into a backpack store then I had my one daughter, she was 4, backpack store called Timbuktu in downtown Denver. And as I'm walking into the backpack store with my daughter and my wife, there's a little tray of samples, and they're little chocolate squares. And I love chocolate, my daughter loves chocolate. She runs and grabs that square of chocolate, and I grab one, we're about to eat it. And then I look, there's a little red triangle in the center of one of the chocolate bar packaging, and it says THC. And I'm like, oh my goodness, these are marijuana edibles. And they're being handed out for free at the entrance to a backpack store. So thankfully, stopped my daughter, stopped myself, we didn't consume it. Had 10 milligrams of THC in each square, so it's enough to get you high. That is illegal under state law in Colorado. But you know what? We're not putting men and women in uniform on every street corner in your state to make sure people adhere to the rules. Okay? And I don't think that's even a good use of resources. However, when we pass policies, we have to accept the consequences that come with them. If you're going to encourage the proliferation and prevalence of a substance, you have to understand there's going to be unintended consequences that happen from that, like this. And that's why we have to think about policy. Law cannot solve all the unintended consequences. You allow an industry, you have to know what you're getting yourself into. Okay? And by the way, talking about unintended consequences, reason why I'm here, my wife and I were in Denver about 7 years ago now before I got involved in this, and Daughter, 10 months old, she's sleeping in her stroller. She's taking her for a walk. Our community had a lot of young families just like us with young kids. Walking her down the side of the street. Somebody lights up a joint as she's sleeping. Secondhand marijuana smoke engulfs her stroller as we're walking. She's breathing that in as we're walking. And my wife turns to me and she goes, you know what? This happens almost every single time we take her for a walk. And it's totally not normal, nor should it be. And I thought to myself, you know, these are the consequences that no one's hearing about before they make these decisions for their state. And so I wanted to get that story out, and that's why I joined up with Sam. So unintended consequences, folks. We can write as many laws as we want, but I think we've all learned that the law doesn't solve everything. And we, you know, as much as maybe some of us would like to, we can't pay our law enforcement officers unlimited amounts of money and put them on every street to enforce every single law in the books. We have to think about what's going to happen when we increase the prevalence of these substances. So, increase in poisonings, increase in calls to poison control center calls. People guaranteed us in Colorado that after a couple of years of legalization, we've had it for 10 years now, a couple of years of legalization, those ER visits will go down. People will understand, they'll start to regulate their use. We continue to see poison control center calls go up, ER visits go up. People are still having issues with these high potency products. So I know we're going to be talking a lot about impaired driving today, and there's obviously a huge nexus between marijuana and impaired driving. In Colorado, 1 in every 4 traffic deaths involves marijuana. The driver has marijuana in their system. We are seeing a huge increase in marijuana impairment on the roads. 130% increase in marijuana impaired driving deaths on the roads. So stoned drivers killing other people on the roads. Okay, so we're seeing huge increases in that. And what's really concerning is the lack of education about marijuana's impairing potential on the roads. You look at this slide here, 100% of people 19 to 24, according to this is from the AAA Foundation, 100% of people 19 to 24 think alcohol impairs you while you drive. Only 63% of them think marijuana impairs you while you drive. So there's a really bad dearth of information about that. Marijuana absolutely impairs your ability to drive. I mean, that's a universally known subject, at least in the scientific field. And there are folks, though, that think that it's harmless. So that, I think, stems from a lack of education in an industry that's saying, you know, it isn't something that's going to harm or impair you. This was an interesting study done in Colorado, found teen drivers that admitted to being marijuana users, and it asked them if they drive while impaired. About half of them admitted to driving while impaired at least once a week. At least once a week. So the impairment factor is a significant one. And it's also important to point out that we do not have a roadside test for impairment that is scientifically validated. And one of the most prominent researchers on testing for impairment, Dr. Marilyn Hustis, is on our science advisory group. She says we are decades out from having something like that. There are a lot of companies trying to say they have it, but we are decades out from scientifically validated roadside tests. So very important to understand that key hurdle to this conversation. The other thing is, and members of law enforcement, you're probably hearing this from your colleagues in legal states, you don't get rid of the black market when you legalize marijuana. El Chapo did not become a dentist. We didn't clear out all of our cartels. My mom's a dentist, and she didn't get that opportunity to work with them. They continue to thrive, the cartels do. In fact, we have 3 new foreign cartels that have come to Colorado under the cover of legalization. They have massive illegal grows that law enforcement can't tell what the difference is, you know, if a grow is legal or not legal, who's running it. They're also using these pop companies as a front to launder money, which is another big issue. So we're continuing to see more and more seizures, more and more, unfortunately, violent altercations in suburban neighborhoods around illegal grow houses that we're seeing, that cartels are literally buying suburban homes, gutting them, and turning them into marijuana grow houses. And one of those is actually nearby where my aunt and uncle live, and they told me about this. So it's a significant problem. But beyond the cartel dynamic here is also this idea that, and I've heard this refrain before, well, Luke, I don't want to have more people using marijuana, but if it's legal, at least we'll get rid of the dealers. People will get it, they'll know what's in it, they'll get their product from legal sources. Well, there's a reformatting here, but this is California's market. 70 to 80% of California's marijuana that is sold and used is done in the black market, not the legal market, the black market. Vastly outweighing the legal market in California. And they've had legal marijuana since 2016. So the industry came forward and said, this is how we solve it. Get rid of all the taxes, lower all the taxes so we can compete with the black market. It's like, well, I thought the whole reason was tax and regulate. You know, how are we going to offset the regulatory costs? How are we going to offset these social costs that we have to contend with? And now we're talking about eliminating taxes. And let me just say, like, you know, in America, when you have a big corporation and a big industry, the whole idea is to reduce your taxes. The alcohol industry has the lowest taxes since the Korean War. We look at our tax breakdown, by the way, like tobacco taxes, for example. We lose $10 in social costs in this country for every $1 in tobacco tax revenue. So it's not like it's a big moneymaker to begin with when you talk about doing these vice taxes. But the black market, though, absolutely outweighing. And you have a situation where 85 to 90% of California's weed is being exported to other states, which is also illegal. So I mentioned tax revenue. Speaking of tax revenue, I'm sure you're all hearing about just the glowing estimates of all the money that Louisiana can make from recreational legalization. And I'm here to tell you that you have to look at this with the full context, okay? So Colorado makes the most money out of any state in the country that has legalized marijuana as far as tax revenue goes, and it's 0.09% of our state budgeted revenues. And this is out of last year's budget. 0.09%. Pennies on the dollar. And our U.S. Senator, Democratic Senator John Hickenlooper, who's our former governor, he is in support of legalizing marijuana federally, but he says, and I quote, "Don't legalize marijuana for the tax revenue. It is a drop in the bucket." A drop in the bucket. And that's from the guy who's for it, and he also was the first governor to administrate this program in Colorado. So it does not cover its costs. In fact, there was a think tank that did a study a few years ago, found that Colorado loses $4.50 in social costs for every $1 in tax revenue that our state makes. Okay, so it kind of brings me to this point. You know, she mentioned I sold a healthcare startup. Never could have gone to my board and said we're going to get $10 million this year and had that go over well. They would have laughed me out of the room. And the reason why is they would have said, well, what did it cost you to make $10 million? And if it cost me $20 million to make $10 million, I'm losing $10 million with my company. I'm cash poor. We need to hold our policymakers and our policy decisions to that same standard. Don't just talk to me about all the money that I can make. Tell me about what it's going to cost. And be serious about what those costs are. I mean, just starting with the roads, speaking of impaired driving, NHTSA tells us that the cost of one life lost on the roads is about $3 million per life. That's what we know from NHTSA. So just right there, if you talk about the hundreds more people dying on the roads in my state alone, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars just from the road costs alone. Now let's talk about other situations, the increases in ER visits. Most Americans are on some form of taxpayer-subsidized healthcare plan, Medicaid, Medicare, etc. So the taxpayers then end up footing the bill for increased emergency services, increased healthcare services. We have to think about all those things before we just go charging into a decision that could have long-lasting financial and other costs. The environment is not something you probably hear that much about when it comes to marijuana. If anything, you probably hear, well, you know, this great organic plant that we're just growing in farms, which I think I've hopefully dissuaded you of that notion. But the impact on the environment is significant with this drug. So it is a very thirsty plant. It estimates in California alone about 30 million gallons of water used for these marijuana grow sites, just in California alone. And California is a state that's always dealing with water shortages, so it consumes a lot of water, also emits a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere, and uses a ton of electricity for these indoor grow houses. So these are big environmental factors. But not only that, the marijuana corporations are not unlike any of the other large corporations we see out there that are growing things. They're using pesticides that are very harmful. There's a species of spotted owl that's gone completely extinct in California as a result of what these grow sites are doing. So the environmental aspect of this is an important one we need to think about as well. So I want to have a conversation about this slide. So you may be shocked when you see this. 68% of California's towns and cities have opted out of legalization, even though they voted for it. 68%. 70% of Colorado, 60% of New York, 71% of New Jersey. Towns and cities opted out, banned pot shops, don't want commercial marijuana stores and advertising and all of that in their communities. 4 options: medical, recreational, decriminalization of low-level possession, make it like a traffic ticket, or continue to prohibit. We went to a national pollster, Emerson College, And we said, give the respondents these 4 options. Ask what their policy preference is. We found 62% of Americans preferred any of the other options on the table other than the legalization of recreational marijuana. So maybe there's a little bit something more that we're missing. Look at these opt-outs. People do not want a commercial marijuana store in their neighborhood. They don't want THC-laced gummy bears. When people went to the poll, to the actual polls to vote, they likely were, they're given a simple yes/no question, that false dichotomy I talked about. They're thinking, okay, well, I don't want my neighbor to go to jail. I don't want my neighbor to have a permanent criminal record over this. Whatever it may be, maybe somebody's using it medicinally and they think it should be for medical purposes. So they're voting how they have to. They're supportive of some sort of reform. They're saying yes, but that doesn't mean that they want commercial marijuana, big tobacco 2.0, which is exactly what we're looking at. Okay, so really important we understand that nuance. And people opting out in droves in states with legal marijuana, it tells you the story hands down. And by the way, I would just say, Teresa's going to give us a great discussion of the social justice side of this, but I will just tell you, when it comes to criminal justice reform, less than 4% of this industry nationally is owned by people of color. Less than 4% black owned. Okay, so this is an industry that is predominantly white, predominantly wealthy, being driven by mega financiers from Wall Street, Silicon Valley, as well as big tobacco and alcohol, as I talked about. This is in the news, folks. Look it up. I'm not just making it up. This is who's driving this. It is not communities of color. It is not civil rights activists. We have a real civil rights activist here who's done a lot for civil rights. I can't wait for you to hear from her, so I'm going to shut up here as soon as I can. She's going to give you a great talk. But understand that this is not about social justice. So one of the biggest concerns when it comes to impairment is in the workforce for employers. Okay, so Quest Diagnostics, they do hundreds of millions of drug tests a year for employers. They did a big release, and what they found was really astonishing. See on the truck there, 17% increase in safety-sensitive workforce accidents where people tested high for marijuana, tested positive for marijuana. 17% in recreational states. 5.9% increase in that for medical marijuana states. Okay? And we're seeing a 200% increase from 2012 to 2022 for post-accident positivity rates just across the board in the whole workforce. So we can look at these statistics and say, oh, that sounds bad, that sounds scary. Put it into perspective. Safety-sensitive workforce like school bus drivers, like airplane pilots, like truck drivers. Imagine you go to work and you work at a factory, you walk into the factory to go work, and your coworker is impaired on marijuana. This is personal to a lot of people. This impacts our community. So we have to think about these impacts and how to deal with them. If you're going to say to me this is just a reality, we have to have laws to give employers the ability to keep that place safe, because then otherwise we're dealing with liability issues. But we have to be open-minded about this and the issue of accidents that are happening in the workforce as a result. I talked a lot about the black market issue, but suffice to say, DEA is reporting their job is still as hectic as ever dealing with the black market weed. A lot of weapons seized, thousands of weapons seized. This is not a peaceable process. There are very dangerous actors that are growing marijuana illegally in states with legal marijuana for cover, and they're guarding it with very heavy machinery and weaponry. Really important to understand that. I mentioned that mental health is a key consideration here. I want to lean into that for a second. So with a high potency supercharge in marijuana, so from 3% to 99% that we're seeing now, more addictive, okay, more harmful, the mental health side of this has really been exacerbated. So this was research that was highlighted by the National Institutes of Health, NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse. They highlighted this just a couple months ago in their formal press release, so that's how legit this study was. Thousands of people were studying for many, many years. What they found is that marijuana was a leading cause of psychosis and schizophrenia for young men, 21 to 30. If they develop a cannabis use disorder, 30% of them of those cases of schizophrenia were developing from that. So basically what they found is if you can prevent heavy use of marijuana, prevent addiction to marijuana in young men in that age group, you can decrease schizophrenia and psychosis issues by 30%. So it's a striking association with this drug. And now we also know from the Lancet Journal of Psychiatry in 2019, you use today's high-potency marijuana regularly, you're 4 times more likely to develop schizophrenia or psychosis. This is all new research because high-potency marijuana is new. These are some of the first studies, large longitudinal studies that we've seen on high-potency marijuana. We have a long way to go to get a lot more. And it's unfortunate that states are rushing forward to legalize unlimited potency marijuana before we even fully understand it, especially when the early evidence is giving us a lot of cause for concern. And that's one thing I will mention. I talked about the potency. There's no state in the country that has a potency cap to deal with this. There's 2 states that have just started. They just started 60% caps. But 60% is still 30 times what it was a decade ago. We're still talking about very, very high potency marijuana. We've got to do something about it. The other thing, and this is a medical marijuana state. My state, Colorado, is a medical marijuana state as well. Opioids. Okay, this marijuana legalization. I can't tell you how many times I've been told this is the solution to the opioid crisis. People are replacing their opioid use with marijuana. Well, study after study after study continues to disprove this. Study in the Journal of the American Medical Association found a 23% increase in opioid overdose deaths in medical marijuana states. 23% increase in overdose deaths. This study that is referenced here finds that legal communities with legal medical marijuana dispensaries see an increase in opioid overdose deaths just in the vicinity of those shops where the medical marijuana is being sold. So we're seeing increases in opioid overdose deaths. I will just tell you, in Colorado, we've seen an increase in overdose deaths every year since 2012 when we legalized the drug. So my point being, not that marijuana is a gateway drug and it's going to make the opioid overdose epidemic worse, but my point is, don't believe the hype that this is going to help you reduce the overdose crisis. There's this antiquated notion that people just pick one drug and they stick with that drug. Well, hopefully, from what the Chief Justice said, what we've all been talking about, polysubstance use is a problem. People use multiple drugs at the same time. No one starts using meth as their first drug of choice. Okay. We know from the research 95 to 99% of heroin users started with marijuana. Doesn't mean that, you smoke a joint, you're going to start using heroin right away. That's not the point here. The point is that we don't use drugs in silos. The moment you start using marijuana, you're priming your brain to start using other harder substances, and there is a pathway there that we can't ignore. So, we just have to understand, you're not going to use marijuana and say, okay, I've got marijuana, now I'm not going to use opioids. It just doesn't work that way. We've all heard anecdotes, and for some people, some people don't get cancer from smoking cigarettes. Good for them. Does that mean that you don't get you don't get cancer from cigarettes? No. There's always the rare case where that doesn't occur. Same thing with opioids. We have to acknowledge the anecdotal side of that. So, mentioned mental health. Among young people 12 to 17, 2 to 4 times greater odds if they're using marijuana to have suicidal ideation, depression, all that kind of follow back. So there's definitely the linkage with mental illness as well. So health concerns obviously around having pot shops in communities, that's a big issue as well. I want to get into some legislation to watch, okay, on the federal side. So, we're constantly watching what's going on in the federal government, what the White House is pushing. And so really, the bill with the most legs to pass is not a full legalization bill, it's not a decriminalization bill, it's not a criminal justice reform bill. The bill with the most legs to pass when it comes to marijuana is financial legalization of marijuana, called Safe Banking Act. What it does, and the American Bankers Association is the lead lobbyist for this, as well as former Speaker John Boehner, it would allow investors to invest in marijuana risk-free. So it would remain federally illegal, people would still get criminal records for it, but bankers and investors can make a lot of money off of it. So I think it's a sad kind of tale of the times in terms of who gets things moving in Washington. But this is the bill we're watching right now. We're very much opposed to it. It would create essentially big tobacco overnight, literally, because Altria, who I mentioned before, Philip Morris, they have said that they will then take on their initiative in America for marijuana, full speed ahead if this bill passes. So a lot is riding on this bill, really important to speak up about it. If federal legalization were ever to move, and it's not going to move anytime soon, this would be the bill. Senator Schumer from New York, our majority leader in the U.S. Senate, he has introduced the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. It's a comprehensive marijuana legalization bill. I urge you to get educated on it. It has really no public health provisions whatsoever. That's really where the conversation needs to start when it comes to this bill. So certainly make your voice heard there. So I want to conclude with a few things we do on the state level policy-wise. So in states that legalize marijuana, whether it's medical or recreational, we do a lot of work to ban the concentrates, the edibles, the high-potency products that should have absolutely no business being sold right now. 99% products, THC products, should not be sold on the market right now. We just have no idea what is in these products and what they're doing. We're just beginning to understand that. So we work a lot to get regulations there. We go up against a very well-heeled marijuana lobby, I will tell you that. Third largest lobbying presence in Denver. Third largest lobbying presence in Colorado is the marijuana lobby. So very, very significantly well-heeled, just like tobacco was. And then we also work to try to get public health voices on the rulemaking committees, because believe it or not, that is a debate. You know, whether or not we should have doctors and public health professionals deciding what goes into medical marijuana. I don't know, maybe it seems like a good idea. Whether or not public health professionals should be involved with rulemaking for recreational marijuana. You know, these are things we think are common sense, but the industry is literally the fox guarding the hen house in state after state after state. So we do a lot of work to bring that. Also, I talk a lot about advertising. The research is unanimous. The more advertising, the more prevalence, the reduced perception of harm that youth have in our communities, and the more likely they are to try this substance. So we work to limit advertising as much as possible. We think that needs to happen. And then we push for a science awareness campaign. Get the facts out about today's marijuana. People don't know what's being sold. We did a poll in Colorado, and we assumed that because it's been 10 years that everyone knows what's being sold in Colorado's pot shops. And only 30% of Coloradans knew what was being sold in these pot shops. Very few of them even knew about potency or dabbing or shatters or anything like that. So the public, we can't assume they know. They don't know, especially with how much this has changed. And in states that have not legalized, look, we're out there in the news as the folks against legalization, but what we're doing is much more than that. We're writing criminal reform bills on the penalties for marijuana. We don't think 14-year-olds should have a permanent criminal record for making a mistake, but we need to give them treatment if they have a problem with marijuana. We're also fighting for more education, work on the roads. We need a whole statewide, here in Louisiana, as well as a nationwide, education campaign on the ability of marijuana to impair your driving, because everybody needs to understand that is a significant concern. So, without further ado, I just want to thank you all so much for your time today. Really a pleasure and an honor to speak in front of such distinguished folks, and thank you to all of you for the great work that you're doing in your state. What a blessing. Thank you.